Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Shiva Agarwal, founder and CEO of Untitled, which is a decentralized identity management platform. I'm also leading Government Blockchain Association in UK and Europe. GBA is a global nonprofit organization with 120 chapters across the world. It helps public sector and government organizations to understand and adopt blockchain technology. And this event series is basically hosted in partnership with Authority and GBA. And what we do is, like, every month we talk about how decentralized identity can help a specific industry. So today we'll be talking about decentralized identity for open banking, to understand primarily what is open banking, and then how decentralized identity can solve some of the challenges which this new industry faces. And obviously we have a panel of experts who would do a deep dive with respect to what is open banking and the different challenges and everything. I would kick off with a presentation with respect to introducing the concept, and then also introducing the concept of self-sovereign identity and some of the challenges which potentially can be solved using this technology. After that, Dr. Sindhu would do a small presentation with respect to his open banking ecosystem, followed by a panel which would be moderated by Nolin. Sorry. So let's get started. So when we talk about open banking, right, I think there's a lot of lack of awareness with respect to what open banking is, right? But obviously there are deep pockets in different parts of the world where open banking is being explored. There are countries like UK, India, Singapore, who are kind of taking a lead with respect to these open banking initiatives, right? And yesterday I was basically doing a bit of a research with respect to what are the challenges open banking is facing, right, currently. Basically the people who are promoting open banking, or the people who are piloting open banking, right? And before we go into the challenges, I just wanted to very quickly talk about what is open banking. Obviously I'm not an expert, but I did some research, but I think we would answer some of the questions that the audience might have during the panel discussion. But very quickly, what is open banking, right? So open banking is account aggregation to basically provide a single view of your accounts across different banks. It's also about providing financial management tools so that people can do budget better and can save more effectively. Lastly, it's also about tailored products offerings based on the transaction history.
I think we lost Shiv again.
Yes, I think. Yep, that's right. Perhaps in between we can do some of the introductions of our panelists, just so that we don't have any dead time in between. So perhaps we can start with Dr. Sindhu Bhaskar. Would you like to? You're on mute, so we can't hear you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Sindhu. I'm a chairman and founder of EST Global and EST Group of Companies. We are based at Cambridge Innovation Center, MIT Boston, and we have created our own digital banking platform. And when we are talking of open banking, so our platform is exactly like that. We have a congregation of 28 startups who are performing different functions and providing all the best possible results for banking and financial services to our customers.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that. Ritesh Jain, would you like to go next? You on? Okay, we've got Shiv back, so we'll pick up on the presentation.
Sorry about that. I don't know what's happening with my internet today, and thank you for improvising. Do you want to continue with your introductions, or shall I jump back into the presentation?
That's okay. Dr. Bhaskar had just finished his introduction. We hadn't started anyone else yet, so maybe you can continue.
Okay. Apologies once again for the inconvenience, but let's get back into the mode. And so obviously, so we are here to talk about open banking. And then these are some of the different aspects of open banking with respect to the benefits that an end consumer can expect, right, with this novel concept. Obviously, account aggregation, financial management tools for better budgeting and saving effectively, tailored products for from based on transactional history, and then also increased access to credit. And obviously, to provide all these benefits, it's basically about data sharing as well, right? In the sense, like the financial data or the transactional data that we have as of today, usually it's only owned by one single banking organization, right? So if I'm banking with NatWest, then my data is with NatWest, right? But tomorrow, if I want to bank with Barclays, then I'm creating a new data set, which is basically owned and managed by Barclays in that sense, right? But with this open banking concept, the data can be shared and exchanged to basically provide a better banking experience across different banks and across different financial organizations. So obviously there are a lot of merits, but obviously it comes with challenges, right? And when we look at some of the and one of the key challenges which the open banking industry is facing as of today is with respect to that there's a huge lack of awareness. Only 18% of the consumers are aware of what open banking is, and this is basically from UK, right? So we are not even talking about the global aspect. So this is where, but then the expectation is that it would slowly increase, and by 2022, it should reach to 60% of awareness. And then obviously certain countries are taking a lead. So so UK is there, Singapore is there, India is there, and there's certain other countries which are basically taking a lead with respect to piloting this concept and providing better services to their citizens and their customers. Obviously, as I said, there are questions, right? Because obviously there's a lack of awareness, and that is where there are a lot of questions which the end consumer is asking, right? And I was basically looking at different websites to understand what this is all about, right? And I basically looked at the open banking website from UK, and these are some of the questions. Obviously, they are not really visible, but the point here is that the consumer is asking some tough questions with respect to what open banking is, and then how the data would be shared, and then what are the challenges with respect to frauds and everything, right? Then I went to another website, which is from Money Savings Expert, who do basically a lot of analysis, right? And then some of the questions that they were asking is basically, is my data safe with open banking? Who can I share my data with? What if I experience a fraud? How will providers access my data? And then what if I use an unauthorized provider? So if you think about this, there are a lot of open questions which are there, and which are basically very, very relevant, right, with respect to how would the consumers get value with this concept of open banking. And basically, when we say open banking, obviously the data is also going to be shared across the board, right? And these are the questions that we can try today to answer and see whether we have technologies to help answer some of these questions and also basically drive adoption.
Sorry, can I just interrupt you for a second?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so I think one of the things which obviously you pointed out is on open banking is all about aggregation. I think it depends which jurisdiction you look into it. If you talk about UK and Europe, it's not really about just aggregation. Within the remit of PSD2 and open banking, data do get created, which essentially translate into making payments as well. So it's, as like if you're looking UK and Europe, open banking scope, in short, is not just aggregation, but moving money as well, which means account to account payment without the middleman, essentially taking out credit card companies or anything else in between. So it's about the money movement as well. And I think if you look at Australia or some other countries, they are going a bit different in terms of what they define open banking was. So Australia is going for what they call is open data and open finance. But obviously they're doing in stages. So first stage is just read only, which essentially will translate into aggregation or views or analytics to provide better summary on the products. So I think even if we say about UK and Europe, I think we have to mention there's a payments as well, which is a bigger picture.
Okay, point taken. And thank you for clarifying this, because obviously I'm not an expert. You are the expert, and that is why you are
I thought it's relevant. So
no, absolutely. This really helps, right? Because we want our audience to understand what this open banking is all about, right? And obviously, I think we'll do a deeper dive in the panel discussion. But what I'm trying to talk about here is like some of the questions. Obviously, these are not comprehensive. There are other challenges also associated. But when we talk about some of the challenges associated with the data sharing, the privacy, and the consent, if we look at those questions, and then when on basis of my research that I did, I felt that these are some of the issues or the concerns that are underlying, right? So when you boil down the entire ocean of the questions, these are some of the concerns that the people have, right? Obviously, there are other aspects also, and then I think while we have that discussions between the panel of experts, I think we would be able to highlight much bigger issues, right? But having said that, I think trust is one of the biggest questions that people are asking, right? Because right now we bank with one organization, and we have the trust that, okay, my data, my money is safe with this bank. But obviously, when we talk about an open ecosystem where the data and the money
Okay, so we've got a technical glitch again. So Bhupinder Singh, seeing as you so wonderfully interjected with some very key points, perhaps you'd like to do your introduction next.
Yeah, hi. So I'm Bhupinder Singh. So my background is I run a startup out of UK. It's a two-year-old company actually. And we specialize in open banking based solution for the bank side. So it's like, COTS products which banks can deploy and, make them, let's say, compliant, or even in some situation compete for the compete section. Apart from that, I run a non-profit organization out of Canada. It's called Open Banking Initiative Canada. And the message over there is exactly the point what we are discussing here, is to advocate the benefits, the reality of open banking, the use cases, what you can solve, and take the consumer into the center for the advocacy point. So we are doing a lot of sessions to make awareness for the open banking, and also trying to pull together the industry, industry regulators, fintechs, to say how Canada can kickstart. So Canada is still in early stages of open banking, I can say, but then there's a lot of work being getting done from the regulator side. Industry is trying to get together, and we are trying to achieve, I would say, a framework for the open banking with various bodies over there. And as I said, like, we are mainly focused to highlight the benefits and probably a definition of open banking which is suitable for Canada.
Okay, great. There's been a question which has come through, which is asking if it's possible for you to share some references or links or docs to help people understand open banking better. So I don't know if this is on your website, or if people can follow you on LinkedIn and get more information. What is the best way?
Absolutely. As I said, like, I think one thing it needs to be taken with the pinch of salt is different geographies are still defining what open banking meant. This group is no different, honestly. So I think when we are asking, what to understand, I think I would say, first start with where exactly you want to start with. We started in UK and Europe, which has its own route to PSD2 legislation.
Yeah.
And as like other countries are doing something which sounds similar, but at the end of the day, I think it will boil down to 2 key points. Better financial data exposure to the third parties. That's the point one. And second is better products which are available to the consumer through third parties, okay? Not through the banks, but third parties, because of the open banking platform or infrastructure available on those countries. So definitely I can share something in the chat, which I think is relevant.
Okay, perfect.
You can
That's
connect
great.
with me on LinkedIn, no problem.
Wonderful, thank you. Shiv, I see you're back on chat. Did you want to continue with your presentation?
Yeah, sure. And I think if this happens again, then I would let you basically move on with the panel discussion, right? So let's try this one last time.
Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So let's get going. So as I was saying, right, so obviously the questions that are out there, and with respect to the concerns, I think there are certain threads which are common, right? So obviously the question with respect to the trust is there. Basically, how do we establish trust in an open ecosystem? Secondly, it's about the security, right? Obviously, my data is being shared with so many different organizations, and even as Mr. Bhupinder clarified, right? Even the payments would be like would happen in an open mode. So it's like with respect to how do we establish the security, primarily with respect to my data, right? Because that is what can be misused. Privacy with respect to how do I ensure that only the data which is absolutely needed for a particular transaction or particular use case is being used. And lastly, how do we ensure the compliance is there, right? Because obviously banking is one of the highest regulated sector with respect to other industries, and to how do we ensure that the compliance is still met when we are talking about an open ecosystem. So the key question is like, do we have solutions, right? And because we are talking about decentralized identity here, I would basically try to see if that solution or that technology can help us address some of these concerns. So when we look at the magic formula, obviously it's not a magic formula. This is still basically something which is being tried and tested across the world. Big organizations are using this technology. But then I think the key concept here is like we are talking about self-sovereign identity, which is basically an identity which is owned by an individual. And then we are also talking about distributed ledger technology, which is basically decentralization of the data storage as well as the control. And when you combine the two concepts, that is where we get decentralized identity, right? And when we move forward, so obviously self-sovereign identity, as I explained, right? It's basically an identity which is owned by the user. It's a user-centric model where the user creates their identity, they own their identity, and they basically use that same identity across the ecosystem, across different sectors, across different service providers. So it's basically one identity which the user creates, and then they are able to use it across different sectors. And then the key characteristics of self-sovereign identity are basically it's minimalistic in the sense like it discloses only the information that is absolutely needed for a certain use case. It's very resilient, so nobody can take it away from you, because obviously we have seen, right, in certain parts of the world where people are struggling with their citizenship, people are struggling with their online accounts and everything. So this is where SSI basically ensures resilience. And it's about portability as well, right? That it's not dependent on a specific technology. You can basically, it's like bring your own identity. You can basically create your identity and you can basically carry it wherever you want and use it in whatever way or you want to use it. So it's very, very privacy and consent oriented. Obviously, the control lies with the user. So in that sense, because the user is controlling it, the user is owning the identity data, that is why it's very, very secure as well. So it promotes privacy, it promotes confidentiality. And obviously, when we talk about blockchain, I think most of us understand now really well what is blockchain and what is distributed ledger technology. But some of the benefits that are very relevant to this discussion are obviously the efficiency, right? That how can be the data can be stored and shared and managed efficiently? How can it be done transparently? And then how do we establish the trust, right? And finally, it's about the resilience as well. So this is where the concept of self-sovereign identity put together with distributed ledger technology has certain benefits, which provides a potential solution to the challenges which open banking is bringing to the table.
Shiv, hi, Ravi here. So just a quick question. In the list of concerns that you highlighted in the discussion, I would also like to understand how is the regulations, in the respective jurisdictions, and especially with regard to the accountability. If something goes wrong, whether it's a data privacy breach or anything goes against customer interest, where is the accountability sits and what regulation says? So these are the 2 points I would be keen to learn in the due course.
Right, Ravi, that's a very, very important question. I'm not a regulation expert here, and this is where I would want Bhupinder and other panelists to address this question. But can we park this question for time being, and when the panel has the discussion, I think we can make sure that this question is addressed. For now, I'm just trying to understand how can we basically look at the data side of the things. How can we ensure that we are, and actually your point is really valid, even with respect to the regulations, right? Because when we look at the data protection guidelines, right, across the world, like GDPR, and there are so many others, even I think they talk about how the data is managed, stored, and how basically the user has the complete control over it, right? So this is where I think some of the aspects I can cover in this presentation, but obviously I would want my the other experts to comment on this specific question while they are talking about while they are discussing this topic in detail. So when we talk about decentralized identity, basically it revolves around the individual, right? It's basically the owner of the identity, and what they do is like basically they create a wallet, right? It's a private space owned by that user. It could be sitting in your mobile phone, it could be in cloud, it could be in web, but it's basically a private space. And what happens is like the issuers, basically the issuers of the identity, which could be government organizations, which could be universities, or it could be let's say DMBs. So they directly issue these credentials or the identities to the user wallet, and they also create a proof of record on the public blockchain, so that which is referenceable. And what the individual is able to do is like, depending on the use case, they are able to share specific aspects about themselves. So it could be either I can share my entire address proof or identity proof, or I can just share certain attributes about myself, or I can just share, basically I can just prove that I am a UK citizen or I am an adult. And these things, so in a privacy oriented model, I can share certain aspects about myself with the requester of the organization, which is also called a verifier. And what the verifier is able to do is like, obviously they can accept this information digitally, but they can also validate the credential, the integrity and the provenance of this information from the public blockchain. So what this model does is like, it basically brings the issuer, the person, and the verifier on one platform, which is very loosely coupled. So what it promotes is that the friction that we usually have with respect to the identity verification processes, where the information exchange is highly frictional. So this model basically ensures that the friction is reduced, and while ensuring that the privacy is there, and then also reducing the identity thefts and fraud. So this basically brings down the time and cost associated with the identity management processes. And when, as I introduced myself in the beginning, so EarthID is basically a decentralized identity management solution, which is basically adopting this concept. And we have basically built a solution which basically provides a solution which can be adopted by individuals as well as organizations. So in this slide, I would demonstrate how this solution can work, right? And one of the questions basically people ask is like, obviously self-sovereign identity means the credentials should, the issuers of the credentials should also be basically part of the ecosystem, which could take time, right? So onboarding governments and other types of organizations onto this platform could take time. So what should I do with respect to my identities which are currently being accepted, right? For example, I have a passport, I have a driving license, I have a national ID card. So what can I do with those things, and how can I use this platform to basically digitize those? So the way this process works is like, the owner of the identities basically creates a wallet, and they are able to basically add their existing credentials like passport, driving license, national IDs to this wallet. So it's about digitizing your existing paper-based identities. And what this wallet does is like, it basically verifies the documents with respect to authenticity, validity, and ownership. And once all those checks and balances are done, those documents get added to the user wallet, which is a digital wallet. And then also a proof of that transaction is also written on the ledger, right, which is a public ledger, which basically provides an immutable proof of authenticity and validity. Now, what the user can also do is like, they can also request digital identities or digital credentials from other issuers, right? And these other issuers could be governments, they could be universities, they could be membership organizations, or they could be your employers, right? So whatever organizations which are issuing you certain credentials or identities, they would be able to digitize this entire process and directly issue you an identity in your digital wallet, rather than issuing you something which is paper based. Because we have seen challenges, right, where proving the authenticity of a paper-based identity is very challenging, right? For example, in one of the discussions, I realized that 50% of the driving licenses in US are fake. And similarly, there are a lot of frauds where university credentials are being faked, and then people apply for employment, right? So paper-based identities have those challenges, and which this solution tries to avoid. And once your identities or your credentials are in your wallet, you can share these things with the requesters, which are service providers, right? They could be public or private sector providers, and including basically banks or other financial organizations. So what a user is able to do is, like, he or she is able to digitize their existing identities, get more digital identities into their wallet, and from there they can share this information in different permutations and combinations, which is like either it could be complete documents, or it could be part of the documents, it could be certain attributes, or it could be just proving whether you are a national of a certain country, or you are an adult, or your gender, or so many other things, right, in a privacy oriented manner. And what the requesters are able to do is, like, they are able to basically verify the validity and the authenticity of these documents by referring to the same public ledger. So what this model does is, like, it basically it promotes privacy, it promotes security, and it also reduces the friction in the identity management process massively. And this is what the Earth ID solution is. And with that, I would like to end my presentation. And thank you for listening to me. Next in line is Dr. Sindhu, who would want to talk about what he's doing in open banking and how he is planning to use decentralized identity within his ecosystem. So with that, Dr. Sindhu, over to you.
Thank you very much, Shiv. So Shiv has given a very detailed description of open banking and decentralized identity and their interrelationship and how it has to be used and what can be expected from that. I'm just keeping my presentation very small and very short. It is just one slide presentation trying to explain how we reach this stage of open banking and what should we expect from open banking. Of course, we need to remember it is not at all adopted by a whole lot of countries, and people are yet to know about open banking. So whatever we are trying to do, these are our pious intentions, and we are trying to create a semblance of entity which can tackle certain problems and iron out the problems of payment, iron out the delivery difficulties, and we should have a very smooth transaction process wherein there is no identity bump. So this is what I am trying to explain to you in one slide presentation. So can you just shift to the other? Yeah. So if we see our banking development, we have certain stages in our banking, and moving with our concept and evolution of banking, we have reached today wherein we are discussing about open banking. So let us look at the year 1933, when we had the Glass-Steagall Act after that Great Depression, wherein we tried to unbundle the banking and investment activities. We thought that no, banking should be separate, and then only they can cater to the development in a better manner, because there was a purpose behind that segregation of activities. So we can safely call it segregation of identity of bank on the basis of their activities. Now, after that, 1999 was a very eventful year, wherein Financial Services and Reorganization Act was there, which again bundled the banking and investment activities in name of creating more income and more profitability for the banks. And because newer concepts were coming in, so banks were considered to be the most suitable entity to take care of all those activities. However, we again had a bump in 2008, wherein banking failed with the subprime crisis, and there was wholesale reaction against banks. There was strong fintech revolution which emerged, and it started demeaning banking and bankers, and it virtually split the banking sector. And that's how we have reached here now, trying to discuss open banking. Now, what we saw that nowadays what we are talking of is again indirect unbundling of banking activities. We are trying to segregate the activities, but there is also a simultaneous bundling of different financial activities, but within an ecosystem through API integration. So we are trying to create unbundling and bundling simultaneously, but changing the status of the player in between. And there emerges a new entity, open banking, which can be part of a normal bank or it can be a separate entity, so that it can take care of the differential activities and the differential composition of structures that have emerged. So what we see that our ecosystem nowadays is basically focusing on aggregator role. We are trying to adopt aggregator role, and that's how we want to do multiple transactions. The reason is simple, that our activity is now concentrated within our palms, like our mobile. So since all activities are concentrated now in our mobile and mobile banking is there, so we are trying to put in as much as activity as it is possible within those applications. That is how we call it like banking app of different banks which have come in the market, and they are dashboard of different activities. So through that dashboard, different activities are connected to the banking entity, and we are trying to provide services to the bank, to the customers. Now, here the question is that when we are connecting different sectors and different activities, how we are trying to do this? We are trying to do it by API integration. Now, API integration also, we can see that when Shiv was doing his presentation, he was talking of PSD2 and all that. So that is the legislative, or say the government directive towards creating an ecosystem for the banking. Whereas there are other private players who are doing it on their own, like we have Paytm in India, we have similar setup in Brazil, in Mexico, who are experimenting with this open banking. The basic purpose of open banking in those countries is creating financial inclusion, because with open banking integrated through open APIs and open data, we are able to provide better services, and that's how we can create better financial inclusion. That is the modus operandi, and that is the basic ethic behind open banking. Now, when we talk of data movement between different verticals of open banking and different structures, there can be so many various type of data. There can be generic service data, which are publicly available and still we are trying to share it. Then there can be customer data, which is very, very specific and private also. And then there can be transactional data, like some payment has been made, that confirmation has to be shared with other entity, like you are doing the bill payment for mobile, or you are making the premium payment for insurance. So that transactional history has to be, you can see when you are doing all those transactions, it moves from the gateway of banking to the gateway of insurance. So we are trying to integrate both the services there. So this is how data is moving between two different entities. Now, as I told you, like just now I mentioned that there is voluntary also private sector initiative, which is like Paytm. Then we have Clearinghouse in USA. Paytm has become a giant and adding so many type of verticals to its dashboard, that you can do shopping, you can do insurance, you can do ticketing, all sorts of activities. So that is providing so much of convenience to people when they are doing open banking through Paytm model. Now, when there is data movement and flow and counterflow of data from one entity to another, which are basically data aggregators, providers, validators, authenticators, and all that, there is interplay of customer acquisition and secure transaction. These are very, very important aspects of our open banking. We can list it: data interplay, customer acquisition, and secure transactions. This trio of features of open banking is what is being debated, because there are certain, say, inbuilt contradictions, and we have to settle that. And it is only because of privacy issue, regulatory issues, our AMLA, anti-money laundering, and which data has to be shared, who has to share it, what is the cost of data, who is going to pay the cost, which industry should be covered, which should not be covered, who should initiate the payment, who should not initiate, whether there should be money movement also part of that data or not. So payment, I mean to say. So whole lot of things are happening. Now, the basic agenda behind this is, again, because of the privacy and security of data, that how to create that environment and atmosphere when we are doing integration and bundling of data through different entities. As we see that we have two types of entities right now, which are the main custodians of all data. One is, of course, the banking, which has accumulated through ages all different customer data. And the second is our Facebook, Google, all these giants, Amazon, who have collected all sorts of data about our all the customers. Now, they are there, they are trying to compete with the banks, and bank is getting rattled. But again, bank has to open itself, play a very planned role, try to share the data with other entities, and try to dominate that area, because they are having the largest data store. So this thought, again, our heritage banks and legacy banks have to have in their mind, and try to create a harmonious fintech ecosystem in the country. Like in, say, in India, for example, we have this Aadhaar ecosystem. Now, what is happening with that Aadhaar? There has been a lot of criticism and all that, okay, fake Aadhaar IDs, and of course they will be there, and we have to check all those aspects of any digital ID. But the basic, say, the purpose of that digital ID was to create a channel wherein we can get rid of all the intermediaries, and there can be direct transfer of funds from government to the beneficiaries, for all, beneficiaries of all the different government schemes. And that became a success with that Aadhaar ecosystem. So open banking concept is meant to create a wonderful atmosphere, open atmosphere wherein there is, again, no intermediary, and the benefits can be passed on to the beneficiaries directly in a secured manner. And when different entities are interacting with each other and sharing the data with each other, what happens that the best, there is an internal churning, and the best possible result comes out. I see there on the screen, there something red has been marked there. So,
Doctor, what happened with that? But yeah.
Yeah, well, Excuse me?
No, I don't know how that came here, but you can continue. And I think if you can conclude and we basically cover some of these points in the panel discussion, that would be great.
Yeah, that's fine. That's why I was just going to stop here. That I'm just concentrating on the basic aspects of open banking,
Okay,
and rest of
perfect.
the things we'll discuss in the panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Bhaskar. We've had some great questions coming in, and what I'll do is I'll have the remaining panelists introduce themselves. We'll address a couple of quick questions, and then we'll move on to some of the key areas. There's been some great discussion in the chat box as well, and some of the participants have been responding and replying to others. So really engaging. So I recommend that everyone checks that out. Also, Tracy has posted the link for where this video will be posted, as well as past videos. So please do check that out as well. All right, great. So if we can get a quick introduction from Ritesh Jain.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening. Depends on where you are based. My name is Ritesh Jain, and I'm a co-founder at Infinite, humanizing credit and credit cards experience for UK as well as European countries. We are yet to go into the market. Previously, I was a COO digital at HSBC, and I led future of payments for Visa in past. I'm a member of G20, a specific program called GPFI, which is Global Program for Financial Inclusion. So definitely you will hear about the financial inclusion as well during the conversation. And that's all about me. So thank you and pleasure to be here.
Norleen, are you there? Tracy, can you please unmute Norleen?
Okay, perfect. All right. Yeah, I couldn't unmute myself. Sorry about that. Okay, so Andrew Kaur, if you'd like to give us an introduction. Ritesh was very, very succinct there.
No worries. My name is Andrew. I'm in the banking circle for this year, celebrating my 30 years in the banking landscape. So I've seen how the banking landscape has evolved, right? Especially in the field of open banking. Like, for example, I'm in Singapore. So open banking, was in the big way since started in 2016, and it has evolved very, very fast into digital banking space and so on. So I will leave that during the panel discussion. So I'm also a GBA APAC chapter lead. So in terms of decentralization of identity and other applications, that is also part of my interest. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so a couple of questions which I'm not sure will be addressed in the panel. There may be, but I'll just throw them out there for now. And then any remaining questions, depending on time, I'll add onto a list and then pose those as well after we've got through some of the panel areas or some of the topics that we're covering during the panel. So one of them, this is a lot of talk obviously about everything digital, and one of the questions was how does this apply offline, or does it apply offline? Any takers from our panel on responding on that one?
I think hope everyone is unmuted. Maybe that could be one of the glitches, but I can add a quick perspective on that, right? Obviously, I think a lot of banking still happens in the offline mode, right? But I think around the world, we have seen that to drive social and financial inclusion, a lot of these banking and financial organizations are moving to digital platforms, right? That is where the invent of mobile banking is there. But then I think with respect to open banking, I think I would want somebody like Bhupinder to comment on that, right? With respect to his knowledge, his expertise, has he seen how open banking is applied in an offline mode?
Thank you. I think, to be honest, I haven't come across this use case yet. Okay, so the least which we are trying to say is, can you do financial inclusion? Okay, which means accessibility to banking service, maybe not a bank. So that's where I think we need to understand it's all about, can you provide the services which can be developed on the third parties, not exactly banks. So I think we are still a bit distant to say that offline banking mode will be there anytime soon. What I have seen or experience, if I have to say about UK, Europe, Canada, a bit of Latin America, that's where I have been involved with. We haven't come across this yet. So again, just redefining, as I said, like everybody has their own take on open banking. My take on open banking is about data sharing, it's about lending and payments. Okay, so these are the three pillars which I believe are, whatever you want to call it, are the key driving factors for open banking. I will just add one more point. Some of the product and services which consumer is already using, like aggregators, they already exist. So open banking has not invented them. Okay, aggregator existed on, let's just say, a bit of primitive technology, old, less secure technology. I'm sure people will be aware of the term screen scraping. So that's what have been powering some of the fintechs which we talked about in current context. So I think when you address the pillars of information sharing, which is confidentiality, integrity, and availability, those pillars doesn't sustain the screen scraping doesn't pass the test of those. So hence open banking, one of the pillar is how to make things secure which are already there in the market. So think it like it's an improvement and much needed improvement for the fintechs, and it has its own benefits. So as I said, like in my experience, I haven't come across this particular use case or even if any jurisdiction is trying to address this, to be honest.
So basically, open banking. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, please, Dr. Sindhu.
Open banking, when we talk of open banking, it means a transactional action. So when transactions are happening, that is what is being taken care of by open banking. When there is no transaction, when it is in rest mode or sleep mode, then okay, the normal bank, like your account is there, you can check your balance and all that. Here it is ecosystem, interacting ecosystem. So until unless there is a function, there will be no interaction, there will be no backward forward movement of data. So offline, there is no need of any offline system here, because it is only related to the transactional part of the action.
So if I can just put some spotlight over here, specifically when it's a very interesting question about the open banking and the offline. And it's really imminent for financial inclusion, as Shiva started earlier. And there are use cases at the moment which are in development in Africa, specifically on the low latency networks. So when you say the offline mode, yes, it is related to the transaction. Open banking is very much for the transaction, but the transactions can be offline and online. And these offline transactions are generally using a different network rather than the internet, right? So yes, to answer question in a straightforward way, yes, there are use cases. They are in development. Whether they are mature enough at the moment, no, they are not. In terms of the financial inclusion, the fundamental requirement is the transaction account. And regardless of the service provider, whether it's a bank or any other institution or intermediary can provide that. So that's why there's quite a lot of movement from the government and the regulators to get into the space where they can start at least introducing the services which can be utilized by people for their account services. not only the bank account services, even for the government payments, which is G2P is very common use case for the financial inclusion globally. So yes, there's quite a lot of movement in the open banking space for the G2P and the other initiatives from the existing framework.
So can we look at it from this perspective, in the sense, like, because whenever we talk about offline banking, it's like that you walk into a branch and then you do your banking, right? So with the new concept of open banking, is it possible that I walk into a NatWest branch and I say, okay, I want to do something with Barclays? Is it possible, in the sense, because that is the true open banking, right? That I am able to basically use one bank's interface to transact with other bank, right? So is that what this could be envisioned as, or not?
Maybe that can be possible, because when supposing you have to deposit a check of say Amex in JP Morgan, you just scan the check and deposit it. So you have not walked to the branch. So maybe if you are close to a JP Morgan branch, then you can go and do the, okay, this is the check, and I have to like interact with the Amex screen, and I need to complete my transaction. So it may be possible.
Thank
But
you, Shiv.
of course, not now.
Okay, great. Sorry, go on.
I would say thank you for putting a spotlight on this, Shiv, because that is the true use case we are looking for, the decentralized identity, as well as the combination of the decentralized identity and the open banking. If we have that, yes, it's a very straightforward use case of invisible banking. We can say invisible interbanking, right? And that is pretty much possible if we have a proper infrastructure and the decentralized identity in place.
Okay, thank you for that. I think we're going to move on, and because the topic that we're focusing on is the challenges in the open banking sector. We've already started on this. And just a little interjection there, because we've had a few comments, and it's also related to this regarding the challenges, was the example of walking into a shop and being able to pay for something instantly. And I think the question is because the topic is about decentralized identity for open banking. So how does that actually, how is it enabled? Like, for example, with Apple Pay, that you can use offline as well. So, it might be that we actually tie this into one of the responses around the challenges in the open banking sector. But perhaps someone would like to share some thoughts on that. Perhaps, Andrew, do you have any views on that?
Sure, because right now, we uses, for example, some of our mobile phones, right, for payments, our credit cards for payments, whenever we walk into a shop, right, in that scenario. In Singapore, we are using, some of our outlets are using QR codes, right, whereby you use your mobile phone to scan and then you do a payment, right, where you order some food and you buy a drink. You can even order it before you come. That's just like Starbucks, what they are doing. So it's all about convenience and what consumers feel at ease to adopt without the fear of leaking my personal information, without the fear of whether my information will it be retained at the device where I did my transaction. And also very recently, will those shops that I visited, will they get hacked, right, by the cyber crooks? So these are some of the challenges that I see in terms of open banking adoption.
Okay, thank you. I think you picked on one of the very key points there, and it's come up time and time again during the presentations around how safe and secure and can it be used. But I think there's also, as was pointed out by Shiv earlier, people being aware of how open banking actually affects them and what it actually is. And more, banks are going to hop onto the bandwagon. So is that a challenge, actually, getting information out to people generally who are being impacted by this? Because most people, like you pointed out, it's about convenience. I get onto my banking app and I look at all the different things that I can do on it. And, you know, like, for example, one of the banks here says, you know, we also are partnered with this organization and that organization, and they can offer you this and they can offer you that. And you download the apps, or you basically upload it into your banking app. And no one really thinks about what that actually means in terms of the information that's held behind and the information that's transmitted. It is sort of educating people one of the challenges.
So, Nalin,
Ritesh?
Okay, sorry.
Sorry, Shiv, go on.
I just want to make a quick comment on that, because I think what I'm realizing is, like, obviously with respect to the awareness, there's a huge challenge, because in my head, even this seems like a very technical thing, right? In the sense, like, we are talking about open banking, there would be open APIs, and then they would be interacting, they would be talking to each other. So there would be like a infrastructure sharing and data sharing and transaction sharing, right? But the key question is, like, how is it impacting the end user, right? Do I download just one wallet which can talk to 20 different banks, or basically, or do I do something different, right? How is my life impacted at the end of the day? I think that is one of the very important questions. And I think if we can answer that question in this discussion, that would be amazing.
See, right now we have one facility that with one bank app, you can like connect all your other bank accounts to that app. So you can see all the different balances in different banks. Okay, now the transaction, of course, is not happening, it is restricted, but balance viewing you can do. So we have reached that stage. So next stage will be the transaction only. And that is dependent on how fast we are able to conceive this idea that, yes, that will be real help to customers, and we adopt it and we start sharing the data. All the banks have to open themselves.
Mm-hmm. So I think it's very clear as to what some of the the pros are. Are there any other challenges in the open banking sector that any of the panelists would like to comment on? I think we've heard from a few who haven't. Ritesh, I think you were going to comment earlier, and then.
Sure. So being involved with the open banking from the start, and taking that into the different economies and geographies as well. So I'm supporting an advisor for open banking in Africa and taking that to central bank. The biggest challenge in the open banking at this point of time is the security, trust, and basically you are sharing data to the multiple third parties, and that's why security is key part of it. And it opens up a door for the fraudulent transactions a lot more than it is today in a traditional banking system. Because your data is scattered with the multiple parties. Because when you think about a bank or a financial institution, there are only two things comes into mind. One is trust and the second is security. So earlier your data was only with one bank and one entity. Now with your consent, your data is shared with multiple parties. So yes, there are a lot more challenges in terms of the security. The network need to be much more secure, and that's why we need a strong customer authentication. That's what defined pretty well in the PSD2 Payment Service Directive in European market. And the open banking, it's not a global standard. It's a regional standard. It started from European market, pretty much mature over here. If you look into the number of transactions, that is in billions. As of 2020, those were itself is around over 6 billion transactions that we have seen. So the adoption is increasing in the markets. If you go into the various other market where even if it's not regulated, they are doing far better. Now the challenge comes down, it's a two-facet challenge. One is for the banks to have that infrastructure and open up their APIs and have that mindset as well for building a shared economy and having a partnership ecosystem with the fintechs to innovate. Because open banking in a nutshell, it's like washing up your dirty laundry in an open space. So the banks need to focus on their legacy platforms and services. They need to gear up to that. At the same time, we need to have a defined regulatory and a stringent regulatory in the various economies. European market, yes, it started from here, so it's much more mature. US is still living on the data access agreements. If you go into the African market, it is not a regulatory yet. Singapore is far ahead. Hong Kong is pretty much mature. India is leading the way. So yes, it's global phenomena maturing over the period of time. The challenges, security, and the fraud.
I'll
Great,
just add
thank you.
a few points here. Obviously, I said, like, some of the problems are already solved. Open banking obviously tried to provide a proper solution to a patchy work, which fintechs has happened. And I think one of the things which we need to understand is it's obviously a little bit of shake up of the big banks, whether we like it, whether we say it in public, but that's what it is all about. It's like a wake up, shake up call for the big banks. Say, you have been good, you have been doing great work, but you cannot sit on there and say this is we are going to be still relevant for the future, because we have done so good to the consumer, to the economies. And that's where this opening of the data vault is essential. And I think Ritesh also mentioned, so there are 2 or 3 models which are surfacing across the globe. One, obviously heavily regulated, UK, Europe. USA, as it is a contractual basis between a bank and a fintech, and some other jurisdictions are totally unregulated. So I think it's the fear factor or the adoption will also be guided by what kind of role the governments play in these jurisdictions, right? I'm positive that in coming years, the regulated industry will have much higher trust for the fintechs from the consumer side. We would still like to see how unregulated market behaves. Because if you ask me, unregulated activities still happen, right? Account aggregation is not a new product. Okay, we have seen it in working, but how it works is nobody knows. Only the people who probably developed it knows it, right? With open banking, those concepts are coming into forefront. Say, actually, it's not good way of how it was done, and so is for the banking, right? I mean, as I said, like lending and payments are the 2 other areas. Viewing data is one thing, doing something with the data is the second thing. I think that's where the apps, which can not just visualize the data, but give you insight, right? So whether it is payday loans, whether it is overdraft loans, there are very, very niche use cases which open banking can solve, which banks wouldn't touch it because it probably wouldn't fall into their value proposition. So I think one other thing which open banking is doing to the banks is, what do you think as your value proposition? What do you think is not your value proposition? It might be value for a fintech, and there is a segment for that. And I think in the same spirit, financial inclusion is probably a value proposition for some fintechs. It might not come for all the banks. And I think in futuristic world, the way I see it is open banking would have ability for a customer to change a bank account within an hour. It should become a habit. I think Western people are more used to this contractual with service provider. I think that's the kind of relationship which we will have in future with banks. Loyalty has to be earned. It's not earned by that you store data, but by the value of the services.
No, that's why so many people get confused with open banking and data portability, that it is something like that. Of course, with open banking, as you rightly said, we can switch over accounts from one bank to another, depending on our focus, what we intend to do and what we want to achieve. And of course, financial inclusion is the most important thing that can be really achieved. And banks, again, banks are integrating to different fintech depending on their nature of activities that they want to perceive and do. So, like the top class banks, they are still into equities, mutual fund, ETFs, all those things. But those banks which are, say, rural banks or cooperative banks, even as a matter of fact, we are trying to we are launching a new bank in India next month. So we are into, since financial inclusion, we have tagged and tried to connect to all those different entities which can really provide that financial inclusion. And it is all through API integration. There are 3-4 banks like ICICI, Federal Bank, RBL, they are connected. They are handling the accounts, funds. Then there are other microfinance entities. Amazon, Visa, MasterCard, all those. So if you take out all those APIs, then there is nothing. So it is virtually network of APIs, and the focus and the intention, what you want to achieve from your entity. That's how you go in for the integration of the model.
Okay, great. There was this sort of leads in a little bit, and it's a question which came up earlier during Shiv's presentation, and he's just flagged it again, and that is around KYC, and in the case of fraud, where does the responsibility lie? So any takers on that question, and perhaps Bhupinder, seeing as you're quite involved in that open banking network, and then Andrew, perhaps you've got a view on that.
Sure. So I think one thing where we see is that, we need to understand what is the definition of the customer in the open banking. If we say that somebody has already a bank account, then the custodian of the bank account holder, the bank, would have done the eKYC process for the consumer. I think with the SSI or the Citizen Identity Program, this is one of the use cases actually which we were actually exploring in Canada. So this is to do with the financial inclusion, or the people who probably don't have a bank account and probably don't even have an identity to prove. So eKYC system, if they are available on the public domain, whether they are provided by government or private institute, but which can be used to actually do this step one of let's just say consumer account opening, then they are really relevant. But again, as I said, we haven't seen many use cases, or let's say use cases which talks about that the consumer identity is not established. So we are going from a known state to probably a more secure state. That's how I see the first level of use cases, or majority of use cases. So the use case where we need to start with an unregistered consumer or unknown consumer, that's where the SSI and the public blockchain can help. I think I will drop one note, which I've seen is Estonian model. Estonia is a small country in Europe. They have done great job with the SSI and blockchain concept. And this is used across the public services. Now, but that's saying that it's not that they can't use across the private sector, opening a bank account or or leveraging any financial service. But as we understand, at the end of the day, every individual has to have a bank account to have a relationship with financial service. Ritesh, correct me if I'm wrong. That's my understanding. If I have to say I'm a consumer of financial service, I will have some kind of account, whether it's a credit account, mortgage account. Again, with my limited knowledge of banking industry, because I come from a technical background, but that's how I see it is. The first step is, can you provide an unbanked consumer using an eKYC system, whether it is public or private, to open a bank account with some provider? Again, so I said, in future, we are not looking at banks as a brand. We are probably looking fintechs as a brand, right? How comfortable we are with the Facebook, the social media sites to share the data. So that's the comfortable which probably open banking is trying to create for the financial sector. Say, actually, it is okay to share data. Again, I'm going to speak on the learning and understanding of UK and Europe, that it's secure, it's safe, and it gonna probably add value to the services which banks are not providing to the consumers, because they don't think there's their segment to be served. So eKYC, it's a very important part, but again, I haven't come across a solid implementation or use case, again, within my experience so far.
Okay, thank you for that. Andrew, if you'd like to weigh in, and then we'll move on, which does actually segue, because we're almost running out of time.
Okay,
So Andrew, over to you.
I'll make it short. In Singapore, we have a national identity system whereby banks are already doing, lending, for example, or granting facilities to consumers and individuals, people living in Singapore. They are already using the Singapore identity system as a form of eKYC on individuals. of course, then the challenge will be how about the corporations, right? And so that hasn't really still an open field, right? Because each bank is still collecting your own customers' information independently, right? And if you are a customer of 10 banks, which means you have been giving out information to your own firm's information to 10 different parties. So that remains both a challenge as well as opportunities, right, for fintech firms to say, hey, I have my own platform, I have my own database, I built out over the years, and this become valuable, right? So a platform like a blockchain, to facilitate those kind of information that's residing in different parts of and economy, and also across border economies, will be something challenging, as well as uh, there's technology is there. It's just that how comfortable the users uh, want to use it, and also share their specific information in order to complete a transaction, for example. Yeah, so I see it as a very good opportunity for whether it's product development, whether it's shared product, shared transactions, that will become interesting space. I can see in the foreseeable future.
Okay, thank you for that, Andrew. And we've talked about some of the challenges and indeed some of the gaps. There seems to be a lot that we need to focus on or look at in terms of standardization, regulatory pressures, and this leads into some of what a few of you have just spoken about, including you just now, Andrew. How does SSI and DID actually fit in with addressing some of the challenges and some of the issues? It's becoming one of those areas which everyone's talking about. Not many people understand, and not many people understand how they fit together, or if indeed one does actually solve some of the challenges related to the other. Could we have a view on that?
Sure. So identity is a fundamental right. And when you think about whether it's financial services or any other services, you need an identity. And what Bhupinder has mentioned over here in terms of the financial inclusion, that is the biggest block. And even in the, not only for the financial inclusion, but even when we look into the more developed organizations, developed countries, and the developed economies and the customers, right? We are still struggling to establish our identities. So KYC is a common problem, and that's more regional problem. It's a degree of issue is regional than the global. So we need to establish the customer identity in the first place, whether we want to bring them into the financial inclusion or whether we want to get them a better financial services. And it is imminent and more critical now than ever before, because we are moving towards the open finance. We are at open banking is the stepping stone. We are talking about only the payments and the account services. We are going into the future, and we are already seeing the use cases of open finance. And what is the fundamental? And that's your identity. And how we can solve that? The only answer that I can think of is the decentralized identity or the SSI. There's no other way around. We can see the benefits from the identity. Pretty straightforward example. Look into Asia, right? Look into India for that matter. UID has changed the face of the financial inclusion as well as the banking and payments in India. And that's a global story today. In UK, we are looking at the digital identity in next coming years. This week, there was an announcement and a press release that yes, government is pretty much focused on the digital identity for UK market. And similarly, European market, that is already in place. And we can look into multiple use cases, FinID from Brazil, Netherlands, Bank is already using SSI. So there are multiple use cases already in place. It's a matter of the degree of the use cases, whether we are doing it at national level. whether the interbank network is ready for that. And that's where the fundamental challenge is.
Ritesh, I will add one more point to the problem which I've seen and experienced is. So yes, consumer identity is important. Right? I think one of the things which is less understood is, as we talk about banks have been historically trusted place. How do I say if I open a fintech and how do I make sure that my fintech is trusted? Right? So this is not just about the consumer. Before I download that smart app, which is best of the best, how do I know as a consumer that this is valid? This is not a fraudulent app from North Korea or rogue state who's just gonna have somehow integrated with the banks. And once I hand over my credential and consent, they're gonna do whatever they want to. So I think it's not just the B2C, there's a B2B problem as well in order to have a fully certified or accredited environment to have where banks, fintechs, and consumer can each trust each other. So again, and just last thing is, of course, it's easier for a regulated world like UK and Europe, because if I have a fintech, I need to go through checks and balances, just like consumer has to go through checks and balances as a part of KYC process. My organization, even though it's a UK limited, I cannot touch the bank data, even though it's named as open banking. Okay, I need to get an approval from Financial Conduct Authority, and then they will make sure that I have a legitimate business, my background, hence only I will be able to touch the data. So in my opinion, there are two problems which SSI can solve. There are some pilots being done in Canada, which I can mention. So some of the organization data is available on blockchain, right? So that's the good part. Then that means that it is already decentralized available for the organization which are already registered. And what do I need? Now I only need to surface that trusted information sources in the part of a contract into the mobile app or something. I think it's in simple word, it would be something like which we all know, an ISO standard or a hallmark standard or something, right? Which says that this establishment, whether it's a fintech or a bank, has been validated or has gone through some kind of checks. So SSI, I genuinely believe have more than just the digital consumer use case, to solve.
Okay, great.
See, in India, what they did, they tried to integrate your PAN card with the Aadhaar card. So it was of course for tax purposes, but also it was trying to create, combine two identities into one and to make it more perfect that either Aadhaar card is genuine or PAN card is genuine if they are matching. If they are not matching, then there is fake ID. So to rule out all those cases, this type of system has been created, and then ultimately, whatever Bhupinder and Rajat they're saying is that ultimately everything, the buck stops at the door of banks because they have the total control of the data and the identities. So they have to be ultimately the main entity responsible for the final identification of either the supplier or the consumer, whatever be the case.
Okay, thank you for that. We're going to move on to the last point and just get everyone to give their view in on this. So we're about 10 minutes off. And this is, what do you think the future looks like in terms of what you're currently working on, what you've seen happening in terms of cases, or what you feel are going to be use cases in the near future and in the next few years, and how you think all of this is going to come together. There's currently no standardization, not much by way of regulation, and aside from what's already a part of regulation for traditional banking. So what do you think the future looks like? And if we could perhaps start with Ritesh.
Sure, very interesting. Wish we could have a crystal ball. But the future is like, I'm looking at the open finance as the future. Open banking is a stepping stone. And I would be rather looking at more humanized financial services, because when it comes down to the financial services, we have all sorts of financial services available, including the predatory lending, predatory credit cards, or even in the financial inclusion space, right? There are stories around M-Pesa, which is pretty successful story in Kenya. Everybody talks about the financial inclusion, but nobody looks into the other side. It has given an opportunity for people to exploit underprivileged people through the microfinance. We need to be really careful around the financial institutions, that how much power that we are giving to these people, whether the intermediaries or the big financial institutions. So we need a more open space, and the financial services over the period of time will become a marketplace when we look into the prime and the near prime customer. And I would like to see the similar sort of services for the subprime customers as well. So there shouldn't be a differentiation, a significant differentiation. Obviously, the credit worthiness will matter, but it needs to be very crystal clear. And that will only happen if we have open banking regulatory, pretty much integrated across the different services, not only limited to the accounts and payments, but related to the health, insurances, and all other sectors. And that is the future we are looking at. And that is the true open finance. And for that, we definitely need the decentralized identity, SSI, and the more open world.
Okay, great. Thank you. Dr. Bhaskar?
Yeah, I feel there has to be a merger of like DLTs, blockchain, SSIs, and that will give the solid foundation for secure identification. And of course, the elitism of technology and fintech must go away. And really, whatever we are considering and trying to bring in financial inclusion through open banking and other such efforts, that should become a reality. The fintech should be made available to the masses so that they can come in line with all the other elites, and there should be a real development, not in a pyramid structure, but a diamond shaped structure, which can be very, very useful and comfortable for the any national economy and any country. Thank you.
Thank you. Andrew?
Well, to me, it's like I think what Ritesh just now also have touched on is about equality, right? Um, People from all walks of life have the equality and access to services that they are entitled to or they can access to, right? Currently, there are many different tiers of services designed for different sets of consumers and companies, right? So to achieve that equality, whereby it can be accessed by almost everybody, right? Without even, I would say, a banking account in the future, right? Because your identity is already known, right, in some form or another, whether it's a digital form or whether it is a thumbprint or scanning of the eye or something through your laptop. This is something I think should be a very interesting development in the coming future.
Thank you. Rupinder?
I think in futuristic world, I think open banking and we look it to be making market more fair and competitive, in short. Fair to consumer, fair to the fintechs, and obviously competitive in the sense that we can, really rely on the services which niche providers want to provide. But then most of the time their hands are tied because either to the regulation or they don't have access to the data, which is the key problem which open banking is trying to solve. I think it's been highlighted many times that it's all about APIs. Yes, it's all about APIs so far. And then it's about the consent. I think we didn't talk much about the consent, consumer consent. In my opinion, there's a consent use case also which lives in probably on blockchain. The reason being is, how do you address multi-party data sharing? It will be hard without the decentralized technology. I mean, consent has to be dealt with, right? Then the data movement, right, obviously, which I think we all understand it's going to be API based so far. I don't envision of my data to live on blockchain, but I do envision that consent for data might live on blockchain. Okay, that's how I see it. And lastly, as I said, like, we want banking and financial services, not the bank as such, but we all need better services. And obviously, whether it is the use case of financial inclusion, because it's all about the consumer, right? So if I don't have a bank account, I have zero relationship. But if I'm a regular citizen, like, if I'm sure most of us are, we have our banking needs, but we are never really sure if our bank is actually meeting our needs, right? Are they being proactive? So are they doing enough for us? I think those things will be addressed if fintechs adopt or markets adopt open banking, and fintech will obviously have the answer because they will have passion for the use cases which banks don't have appetite for. So I do foresee, fintechs taking the lead. And it's not to just say that, banks will lose the market share. Here's the thing which I've noticed. Overall, it's the pie which grows bigger, not pie taken away from the banks. I think this is very much obvious in the UK and Europe. And I hope the message goes globally that fintechs are not going to steal the pie. You're going to grow the pie bigger and they're going to take their share. So banks still going to be relevant if they stay focused on open banking and openness. Because for them, the challenge is not coming from small banks, fintechs. The challenge is going to come from likes of Facebook, Apple, GAFA guys, because they can eat the banks, probably the countries as well, in terms of financial power. So I hope, open banking brings fairness and competition. That's the only two thoughts. And yes, security. Sorry.
Yes, big one. Thank you so much to all our panelists. Really, really insightful, raised as many questions as there are answers, and I think everyone will agree that there's still a lot of work to be done. I'd like to thank all the participants as well for hopping on and for your questions. I know that we couldn't get to everything, and also like to thank you all for giving your views and sharing some links and responding to each other in terms of your knowledge and expertise as well. That's really appreciated. And to close off, we'll hand back over to Shiv.
Thank you, Nolene, and thank you everyone for the intriguing conversation. I think obviously we understand that there are a lot of unanswered questions and open challenges. Obviously, I think the key question is basically in this world of shared economy, open banking, social media, how do we ensure that the data protection is there, the privacy is there, the consent is there, and also how do big organizations and banks how do they cooperate, how do they share their infrastructure, and from an end consumer point of view, how do they get a seamless experience, how can they do borderless banking. And I think it's about how do we provide that ease of use, right, with respect to I can bank wherever I want to bank and without having to worry about the security of my data and my money. So I think this is the future that we are working towards, and obviously there are certain questions and challenges that are still open if you want to answer. And SSI is one of the potential solutions. Obviously, as we discussed, a lot of pilots are happening, and then it has proven its merit, it has proven its power, and obviously it's about how about mass adoption, and this is what Earth ID and GBA is basically all about, driving the adoption of distributed ledger technology, driving the adoption of SSI. And we'll keep doing these events and talking about the different challenges different industries are facing and how can we help them solve those challenges. And with that thought, I would like to apologize once again with respect to all the technical issues that happened. Sincere apologies. I hope you enjoyed the conversation, and please dial in again for the next month's event. And please follow Earth ID and GBA LinkedIn pages and our YouTube channel so that you can join the other events as well. Thank you very much for joining today's event. Thank you. With that, we conclude. Thank you.